So hello everybody. Good afternoon everyone. So these are the classification of the watershed. But first let's understand why do we need to know the different classification. To know the different classification, it's because different classification of watershed has different uses and they also have different characteristics. But let's do a small recap on what is a watershed. So a watershed is an area of land wherein all waters that enters it through precipitation, springs, drains to a single point. So ang pasabot ani is that kung ang tubig ni moog ulan or gikan sa streams or sa groundwater moagi siya sa single point. This is the single point here, as you can see in the visual aid, and that can be classified as a watershed. And also a watershed is classified when maingon nato sa watershed if kanang watershed is naa siya storage of water. Now, these are the classification of watershed. So the first classification is urban watershed. The next one is agricultural. The next is forest, and so on and so forth. And we will discuss that one by one and what's their characteristic and their purpose of the community. So now let's look into the urban watershed. So urban watershed, as the name suggests, urban, so there is a high population in that specific area. And as you can see in the visual aid, it is dominated by buildings, roads, streets, pavements, and parking lots. And most of the drainage in this type of watershed are artificially built. When we say artificially built, guys, it is a human made. It is not made by natural uses. And due to most of the buildings and most of the structures here in urban watershed are human built, these cause increase in runoff, and it decreases soil erosion. And we also have to remember that this type of watershed is vulnerable to flooding due to the drainage system inadequate. So now let's look into the next one. So the next watershed is classified as agricultural watershed. When we say agriculture, what comes into your mind? It comes into your mind your food, right? So this type of watershed provides food for the human race. And the land use is very dynamic. Why is it very dynamic, as you ask? It's because it is always a change. The land is always tilled for better crop yield. And usually this type of agricultural watershed increase infiltration because most of the areas here have little to no structure made by man. And due to a high increase in infiltration, there is a decrease in runoff which cause less erosion for this specific area. So what are the benefits of agricultural watershed? So the benefits of agricultural watershed is that when we have a watershed in our backyard, like in a farm, it gives constant water for our pasture and for our crops. And it also increases crop yield because water are needed for our crops to be able to flourish. So now let's look into the next one. So the next is forest watershed. So in forest watershed, this area is usually littered with leaves, stem, branches, and woods, and etc. So in this type of watershed, guys, there is a high amount of vegetation and there is high amount of flora and fauna. And due to being high amount of vegetation, when there is a high intensity precipitation or rainfall, there is little to no runoff. As you remember in our little activity that we done with Miss Alisna, when we do a heavy precipitation, when there is a lot of vegetation, there is little soil loss. This is due to the vegetation holding the soil from running off. This type of watershed, guys, it provides water for living organism. It nourishes aquatic organism. It provides constant water for the trees and the plants. So this type of watershed does not experience drought. When we say drought, guys, is that the lack of water in a specific area which could cause massive damage to the flora and fauna. But we also have to remember that this type of watershed is easily accessible for invasive plants, which cause competition to the local plants in this area. So the next one is that mountainous watershed. So mountainous watershed is predominantly mountainous. There is a lot of hilltops and there is a lot of trees. No, not trees, but rocks in this area. And because this type of watershed can only be found in higher altitudes, such altitudes, these cause snowpacks. Snowpacks are areas of specific areas in a watershed wherein there is a snow in that specific area. And due to being a high amount of rocks, this type of filtration is less. So the infiltration in this area is little, and the surface runoff is dominantly high for a given rainfall. So this type of watershed provides water for organisms to living in the mountains, and it also provides foods for animals used as transports to other location. So this type of watershed basically is that taas ang iyahang runoff, kay gamay ang infiltration due to the amount of rocks presence in this type of watershed. So the next one is the desert watershed. Desert watershed is, the name suggests, desert, so there is little to no annual rains in this type of area. The soil is mostly sandy, so there is a high infiltration to this area. And this high infiltration causes no ponds, or there's no creation of watershed or little creation of watershed. So this type of watershed provides water to the surrounding plants, provide an oasis for animals that travels there, and also provides habitat for living organisms, provides suitable area for farming. So the next one is coastal watershed. So coastal watershed is partly urban and partly dynamic in contact with the sea. So when we say coastal watershed, guys, it is primarily found in coastal areas or near large bodies of water. So this type of watershed has high precipitation, high rainfall, and usually source of water supply. So it provides habitat for aquatic animals, provide reservoir for community, provides transportation for humans, provide water for farming utilization, and provide electricity to cities. And the next watershed, this is the last watershed that we will be discussing. So this watershed is wetland or marshland. So this type of watershed is almost flat, comprises of swamps, marshes, water, of course, and this type of watershed has normally high and minimal infiltration. This is due to the soil being saturated. So when we say saturated, it reached the max capacity of the soil to absorb the water. So when that happens, there is a high chance for runoff to occur. So most of the rainfall or precipitation that happens here becomes runoff. But this type of watershed provides a benefit to our natural ecosystem. This type of watershed gives wildlife a plenty of vegetation for their natural food and habitat. But this type of watershed has a high amount of evaporation. So this type of watershed also provide habitat for growing fish, provide land for farm utilization, and it also protects the water quality of our ocean, which is a big help to our aquatic life. It is home for many plants and animals. So that's it. That will the topic will be discussed by someone else from our group.